refused to give the Negro any land. Through an act of Congress, our government was giving away millions of acres of land in the West and the Midwest, which meant that it was willing to undergird its white peasants from Europe with an economic floor. But not only did they give the land, they built land-grant colleges with government money to teach them how to farm. Not only that, they provided county agents to further their expertise in farming. Not only that, they provided low interest rates in order that they could mechanize their farms. Not only that, today many of these people are receiving millions of dollars in federal subsidies not to farm, and they are the very people telling the black man that he ought to lift himself by his own bootstraps. Now, this is what we are faced with, and this is the reality. Now, when we come to Washington in this campaign, we are coming to get our check.
Hello, and welcome to another episode, the first episode of A Seat at the Table, co-hosted with our esteemed guest, Miss Charla Plaines, A Seat at the Table 2022. As you heard, our intro by the great Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, we are starting our podcast off for this great year with the theme of economic equity, inclusivity, and making sure that we clearly understand that the systems that are out there that for far too long has held us back as a people, us back in terms of socioeconomic class, whether it's white, black, Latino, whatever this classism piece, we're going to address that this year, ongoing. And not only address it in a way where we're talking about it, but we're going to talk and have robust conversations about how we can dismantle and ultimately eradicate those things that are in place that are preventing everyone from living out the true American dream of inclusivity. So with that, I'd like to introduce my esteemed co-host again, the one and only Miss Charla Plaines. Hello and welcome.
Thank you.
So
welcome. Hi, everybody. Glad to be back. I appreciate the opportunity to come back and work with you again this year. It's particularly on MLK Day, a day on, not a day off. And I'm looking forward to the conversation with all these lovely folks on our panel.
So you're not just the pretty face, as we always say. And of course, you started when you were 13, but
yeah.
We know from which I know from which I come in terms of your influence, not only in this community, but throughout the Commonwealth and nation as a whole, when it's talking about economic equity and parity and making sure that there's everyone has equitable access to resources and the importance of that. We go way back to the Marcus Garvey program, in which things were instilled in young people in terms of taking full advantage of opportunities afforded to us in the education system, workforce development, and anything else in the community that basically was a positive avenue for us to travel. What does that mean to you this day and age, where we are now in terms of 2022 moving forward in today's society overall?
So I think the opportunities have, in my view, have kind of dwindled over the last administration. I think that we had a setback just because of the nature of what we were dealing with under the former administration. For me, working with the reentry world, though, there's been a lot of forward steps. We have been able to get folks coming home from jails and prisons into the kind of resources that will help them continue to be successful once they return. And we're now in 35 counties where we have reentry coalitions, where people are looking at the importance of allowing people those opportunities once they come home. And we're seeing that by doing so with reentrance, it's also allowing those who have the means to open up the doors to look at how they can do it past the reentry segment. So we're bringing folks together now who are doing things, economic development, housing, education, they're all coming together, particularly around the reentrant, but it's also expanding over into the greater communities in which these opportunities are now being afforded.
Right.
And I don't think that opportunity was as broad before as it is now.
Okay.
So I kind of credit, the work that we've done with around reentry for bringing a spotlight to some of these communities, that these disparities not only exist for reentrants, but they exist for folks across the board.
Right. Okay. And with that, we clearly understand our topic and our point here today.
Mm-hmm.
And we can't do it alone, as we know.
No.
And so with that, we have the opportunity of being joined by an esteemed panel of guests. And as we all know, we don't go in on this show with predetermined answers and or questions or anything. This is something that we pride ourselves on in terms of coming together on behalf of this community and just having an organic conversation. So some of our people today that we have on the panel, I'll introduce them. We'll bring everybody on right now. First, our ladies that we have, Dr. Karima Fitzgerald, who is no stranger to the show. Dr. Fitzgerald is currently a trauma surgeon throughout the Commonwealth. Ms. Tameka Hatcher is a civil rights expert, especially when it comes to educating those law enforcement and other human services fields. Ms. Rogette Harris, aside from her 9 to 5 in terms of where she's in the health space and health equity space, she is also the chairwoman for Dauphin County Democratic Committee. And of course, we have Ms. Myneca Ojo, who heads up the Department for Pennsylvania Turnpike Commission. She is the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. Now, our gentlemen, we have the esteemed Dr. Raymond Winbush from Morgan State University's Urban Research Institute. We have Mr. Cornelius Johnson, who is still ours. I still have to say former city councilman in Harrisburg, who is now incorporated in Atlanta for Chick-fil-A. Of course, we have Mr. Joseph Robinson, who is well known throughout the Commonwealth and abroad for his work around equity and inclusion, leader of the Martin Luther King Leadership Development Institute. And then we have Dr. Travis Waters, who is the former superintendent at Stilton High Spire School District, but is now professor down at Shippensburg University. And last but definitely not least, we have Mr. Brian Hudson, who is the former CEO at Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency, but is definitely, we're going to be talking about affordable housing and access in terms of economic development, who is the foremost not only educator, but professional in that space. So welcome to you all.
Nice to see everybody.
Definitely. So
good to be here.
At this point, what we like to do is open it up, and we'll start with Miss Myneca Ojo. Everyone heard the clip that we opened up with, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King clip, in terms of equity, in terms of what we need to do to ensure that we're accessing all of the tools that are available to us out here in these United States of America. But we're going to go around and just open up with our guests to ask, what does that clip mean to you moving forward in 2022 from your personal side as well? Well, we'll start with your professional side, but most importantly, your personal side. And let me go back more so because we're not speaking with Myneca Ojo. We're not going to speak from the perspective of your role with the Pennsylvania Turnpike. What I want to do is highlight the fact that you were the first mayor of Hanover, historic first mayor of Hanover. So today's show will be couched around your discussion around that position that you held, if you don't mind, please. So what does it mean to hear that clip from the perspective of you being in that leadership role in a community that was not necessarily reflective of America's diversity?
Okay, well, first of all, I want to thank you for this opportunity and happy Martin Luther King Day. This is a day we should always celebrate, but it's nice that we're able to celebrate it in honor of him and his amazing accomplishments, really all the things that he's done up until the age of 40 years old. It's really just remarkable to know that someone so young could have such a major impact on what we have done in this country as it relates to civil rights. Most importantly, his preachings and his teaching really raised awareness to the economic injustice of African Americans. At the time that Martin Luther King was really speaking about those economic justices, we were looking to have parity by being simply equal in this society. We know 53 years later that equality is really not what we're looking for, but we're looking for equity. But also, we're also seeking remedy. We're seeking remedy for a system that for the past over 400 years has systemically left African Americans out of the role in terms of economics and the ability to create them. So much that there were many systems just built around them. Systems that denied us opportunities to have housing, systems that denied us opportunities to work specific jobs, systems that denied us the opportunity to be fully engaged or part of the military if we wanted to be. It's just so many things. And then the most important thing is the prison system. As I saw you talk and heard you speak, Ms. Plaines, with regards to the reentry systems, like this is the system that is fully equitable for African Americans to be a part of, so that they will be in a system that fully engages them in the process of not being included in our society. So as we move forward with Martin Luther King's message, the message should always be, from the perspective of any community, is how we can all gain equity in a community that has really, for the most part, shut us out. And that is in regards to American descendants of slaves who have lived the system of being excluded from this. So I welcome this discussion today because I think it's really important. And I think that in terms of civil rights, we really need to focus on how our mindsets must shift from having a job to being economically independent as a people. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that conversation. Next, we're going to have Dr. Ray Winbush.
You know, I think that what we've done, you know, the clip I think was very important. I think we boiled Dr. King down to 4 words: I have a dream, like we boiled Malcolm down to by any means necessary. And even Rosa Parks to, you know, she didn't get up. And these people were more than those 4 words. I took Dr. King's words literally when I first saw that clip, that he was preparing people for the March on Washington in August of 1963. And he names how white people have always had advantages in terms of, you know, the, what do you call it? The Land Rush Act, schools, you know, how to help them, land grant colleges and everything, and how Black people have it. And what he's saying is that we're going to come to Washington to collect the check. And I think that he talked in that sense, or at least implied the issue of reparations. Black folk don't like to talk about that a lot of times, and white folks try to avoid it altogether. And I think that when he talked about reparations, he's talking about the debt owed. Even in his I Have a Dream speech, he spoke a lot about the check to Black America had bounced. And I think we have to revisit that. We have to be aggressive in pursuing it. I think we're in a time now in the United States that, you know, last week in the New York Times, they were talking about a civil war, which for many of us is unimaginable, and the worst war any nation can fight. but the New York Times is talking about the possibility of that. And others are talking about the possibility of that. So I took Dr. King's words literally, that we're in difficult times. And like Sister Myneca said, we have to start talking about equity. And I also think we should start talking about reparations.
All right, great point. Ms. Hatcher, please join us.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Well, I have a whole lot to say on this particular topic.
Let's start off with a minute. I know you too.
Oh, no, I listen, I got my bullet points down. But I think that Dr. King's words were as timely then as they are now in terms of we're coming for our check. And I think it was just putting the society on notice. And I think that society should be on notice because we absolutely are coming for our check. Know it. Look for us. In terms of voting rights, in terms of redistricting, in terms of economic empowerment, in terms of fair and affordable housing, educational equity, access to health care, reparations for discrimination, and just the freedom to be in general, to walk the streets. But I think a deeper conversation that needs to be had, and we're talking about King and we're talking about civil rights in the context of the power structure, but I think that there also needs to be an in-depth conversation of the likes that we generally have in private amongst just ourselves about Black people's responsibility to one another. We just had another murder in the city of Harrisburg last night at Bill's Cafe of a young man. I didn't know him. I don't know anything about him, and it doesn't matter. But the fact that another one of us has perished in our city at the beginning of the year, it's concerning to me. And I think that and watching Women of the Movement this last week, the show on ABC that's been produced by Will Smith and ABC, you see repeatedly this theme of Black people who are in cahoots, if you will, or accomplices or complicit with the power structure, with oppressing and putting down one another. And I think that that's something that we as a people also need to address too.
Great points.
Absolutely. And I'm glad that you mentioned that murder because I was, very, very heartbroken to hear again this morning that we had another victim of gun violence in our city, and to know that we are, regardless of what the stats say, excuse me, where we're not up to the national level, for our per capita, we have one of the highest rates of gun violence in the state of Pennsylvania. And that's something that we really seriously have to address. Part of it is we know there's a lack of education, a lack of love for each other. And that I believe is a fault of all of us because we're not teaching our children to love themselves. So I'll get off that horse.
Oh, hey.
And I'll move on to our next guest, and that's going to be Mr. Brian Hudson.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here on MLK Day, especially. It's interesting because before I joined our podcast, my wife and I were watching the movie Selma over again, and I started comparing what was happening then versus what's happening now. And some of you touched on it already. Voting rights, which was the big issue we're fighting for there. Now we're talking about redistricting. So to impair those rights, and as you know, across the country, some of the legislature, Texas in particular, passes some very strong, and Georgia, some very strong voting laws that kind of impairs our right to vote. So I started thinking about, how long it's been and look how little progress we've made. So when I look at what can be done, I'm still trying to fight for, equity, we call for our young brothers who are now embarking on their own businesses. We got a lot of stimulus money coming. And when I see that much money coming to the table, I want to make sure that that equity is distributed in the right way. I don't know if many of you saw the article about the farmers. Some of the white farmers have been getting subsidy from the government for years. Oh, yeah. But as soon as it was becoming eligible for the Black farmers, they were opposed to that. Now, why would that be? So for me, these issues are still existent of voting rights. Ms. Charlotte, I'm glad you talk about prison reform because it's different for us. And from a personal experience when, dealing with some of our relatives who have gone to prison, it's tougher. And even when we come out, it's tougher for us to exist and move on and start over again, even though we paid our debt to society. So I think a lot has to occur there in terms of the sentence being handed down, the rehabilitation that goes with that comes with that. So one of the things I'm trying to help, given my background, is to provide that source of my expertise, education to the young developers so they can tap into some of these equity situations. And that means that those who are lending the money, I'm talking about the banks and the government agencies, need to have a conscious efforts to provide that outreach. And we need to stay focused on them, and they need to be held accountable. So my other issue is accountability. Just taking things as status quo, call them out. When you see something wrong, let's call it out. And I do agree with, the black on black crime. We're talking about how high the Harrisburg murder rate is. You're right. It's too high for our population. And then I look at cities like Philadelphia and Chicago, and it's even worse. This cannot continue. If we are to move forward, and I think there's an opportunity to do that in a bigger way that's ever been possible for. It's a shame that, COVID had to come to have some economic stimulus money to come, but it's here now. And we have diversity and inclusion at the forefront. And I don't want it to be an issue like affirmative action that it comes and the corporations scramble and they do what they need to do. And then all of a sudden it's wiped off the table and we're back to square one. I think we need to provide something that's sustainable, that goes forward, and it holds the folks accountable. And I'm all for that. And I'm going to do what I can to make that happen. So thank you for having me this afternoon. This is going to be a great discussion. I can already see that.
Very well said. Thank you very much for joining us. Chairwoman Harris, Rogette, please.
Thank you. We're celebrating Martin Luther King's birthday today, and we do every year. But a lot of times we forget that in 1967, he was actually rated one of the top 4 hated men in America. So even though, we look at him as a hero now, that really wasn't the reality not that long ago. What I personally admired about him and what we forget today is he understood that real change happened at the ballot box. Yes, he was an activist. Yes, he was involved in a lot of protests, but he was also up at Capitol Hill, making sure that legislation was getting written and being passed. And we forget that piece of it. A lot of times we have the activists on one side and we have the elected officials or the politicians on the other side, but we need to come together if we're ever going to create real change and real action. We also need to stop just accepting anything. We saw a lot of politicians, elected officials at the Black Lives Matter rallies, but look at their staff. There's no one on their staff that looks like me. Who are they hiring? What are they voting for? We see a lot of posts on social media today celebrating Martin Luther King's Day, but some of these same individuals are blocking the Voting Rights Act that we need to get passed. So we need to stop accepting the visual and start demanding action. That's basically what I'm trying to say.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And certainly one of the other hats that I wear is working not only for reentry for the Attorney General, excuse me, but I'm also a member, or I work with part-time the Dauphin County Elections and Registration Bureau. So it's been a real eye-opener. I'm always troubled by the numbers of folks who come out and vote during our elections. Certainly we need to have a conversation about how we can improve the turnout for voting. We need to have, in my view, a strong political education piece going on in our community so that people are aware of, the power of the vote, the purpose of their voting, how folks fought long, hard, and still are fighting for the right to vote. And then the other thing I'd like to see us push is the mail-in ballots. One of the things that really struck me was when the mail-in ballot piece was implemented in Pennsylvania, the RNC, or the Republican Committee, sent out a mail-in ballot application to every one of the registered voters in Dauphin County. It didn't happen for the Democratic voters, registered voters. And so those are some of the things I think, moving forward that we need to really concentrate on, educating our folks about the power of the vote, and also educating them on ways that they can stay home and vote and their vote still be counted, because it is a very viable option and it's not really being taken advantage of in this community as it could and should be. So I'll get off that box again, and I'll move on. And the next person we're going to bring to the mic is Dr. Travis Waters.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me on the show this afternoon. And I was unable to see the clip, so it's hard for me to speak directly about the clip. But some of the things that I think about when I think about the topic is and think about Dr. King is, how far we've come as in a lot of time as individuals, but how far we have to go as a group, and most of those systemic barriers are still in place. We've seen I've had individual success. A lot of us have had individual success, but as a people, we're still we still have those same barriers that are in place. And there are those right now who want to keep those barriers in place. And unfortunately, some of the things that I see is that they're actually using some of us as the face of white supremacy. That's very disturbing to me. And we're here talking about equity, but equity is a bad word right now. People are pushing back against equity. So I think it's something that we have to consider. We have to be able to speak out, and we have to be able to speak out when it doesn't make us popular. Someone mentioned that Dr. King wasn't popular at the time of his death. That's absolutely right. He wasn't popular among a lot of Black folks, and there's a lot of revisionist history. I'm sure everybody now is saying we love Dr. King, but a lot of people didn't love Dr. King before he died or at the time of his death. Because he did speak out, and we have to be able to speak out. There are some loud voices right now pushing against equity. We have to be just as loud, and unfortunately, right now we're not. We're silent. We talk about this stuff about this anti-critical race theory in schools, and we know critical race theory isn't being taught in schools. It's really a push against equity. It's a push against kids learning true history, and they're very loud. And I don't see us having the same voice, and we need to have those same voices as we talk about, a fight for equity and a fight against systemic racism.
That's a great point. Excellent. Thank you for that. Dr. Fitzgerald, please join us.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure, and it's always difficult to talk about these topics, but I think particularly with that speech, it talks about the reclamation of our dignity in a way that claiming our check means claiming our dignity, claiming the things that have been stripped from us in so many different forms. For me in particular, my focus is obviously healthcare, but then by way of all of the things that have transpired over the last couple of years, even though it's been in existence for since the dawn of time, a lot of places want to basically apologize and give so-called reparations by creating these spaces and saying that we're okay and that we can have these conversations. But the diversity, equity, and inclusion task force and committees and positions within different organizations are their ways of trying to placate us. Whereas our job is to reclaim what that actually means and to change the narrative completely and use those spaces to no longer be complicit in their plan, but to push our own agenda and allow them to see what equity really looks like for us. They will never want to put us in those spaces, but they do it as a sense of sort of reparations. And they think that we will not use that space to the best of our advantage. And I think we being in those spaces and not being afraid to just be the faces of equity and actually show them the importance of it and push the agenda and create change is exactly what it means to reclaim and to claim our checks at this point in time.
Absolutely. Yeah, we have to be at the forefront for the push for equity across the board. Absolutely, because nobody else will. And if we're at the table, we need to be talking about, making sure that that there's an equitable, there's equity across the board. I know one of the things we did with the reentry council is we now have a diversion and equity subcommittee for Pennsylvania Reentry Council. Because we know, even though, you would think that there's no disparity amongst reentrants, some reentrants are getting better services than others. And there'll be afforded opportunities that others aren't. So, it's a fight across the board on all levels in terms of equity. And that's one of the things certainly that we've been automatic about pushing.
I guess I want to, well, go ahead. Let's get Mr. Johnson.
So next we're going to have Dr. Oh, no, not doctor. Sorry.
He might be. You never know. He might be coming on. You never know.
I'm skipping that route.
So Mr. Even though he left Harrisburg, he's still with us in heart and spirit, Cornelius Johnson.
Yes. Thank you for having me. And probably the key thing that's ringing inside my head as I'm listening to the fine panelists speak is just access. So like we know DE&I is a big buzzword right now. Everyone's talking about it. Everyone's having conversations about it. But the powers that be really are against really giving us true access. When we're thinking about access, we're talking about economic access. We're talking about educational access. We're talking about political access, not just even from a face, but even just within staffing and legislation and things along that nature. They know what needs to be done in order to give us access, but they also know that as we become more informed, they keep changing the game up on us. So just looking here at Georgia turned blue for the first time in many, many years. And as soon as that happened, the game field has changed. New laws have been passed, but it's my hope that we still carry that same type of energy to, even though while the game is changing, we are pushing just as hard. And just to comment, the last time I was home, I actually was with the victim who was murdered yesterday. So it was kind of, I never met him before, but I would just happen to be in the same party that we were at, just interacting with him. So just seeing that post happen last night, also as well as hearing the young lady who lost her life to domestic violence, Erica King, was also kind of hurtful. And I think when we're thinking about young people, especially my age and younger, we're being brought up in a time where we're not buying into the political system anymore. And it's unfortunate, but I think it's just due to just seeing the returns that inside our lives personally that they have not been able to reap. And as Dr. Ray Winbush kind of pointed out, the education around like Dr. Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, that teaching is not there. So without that teaching and that foundation and what we're seeing today in America, it's kind of hard to kind of get rallied up, especially when you're dealing with the current poverty and violence and things that happens within our neighborhoods. So I really think it's upon us to kind of keep that motivation and hope alive, to keep our faith high, but as well as understand and empathize if we are frustrated and wondering why people are not taking the actions that we think is necessary to keep the movement going.
Okay, great point. And last but definitely not least, the leader of the Martin Luther King Leadership Development Institute, Mr. Joseph Robinson Jr., University of Virginia's finest.
And welcome to you all, Charla. Good to see you as well, and all the panelists. Certainly it's a delight to participate in this robust discussion today. As I think about the clip, I didn't hear it, but I'm familiar with it. If you're speaking about the dream speech, and certainly where he talked about the check, and that's the title of this today's topic. And certainly we must have this conversation about seeking what's due to us. And you talked about all the programs over the years, whether it's land grant programs, et cetera. One of the most far sweeping programs that benefited everyone but African Americans was the what they call the Servicemen's Readjustment Act, or as we know it, the GI Bill. It was even termed by one white professor as affirmative action for whites, because of those 16 million soldiers returning from World War II. There were at least 1 million African American soldiers who returned among that group, and they were denied access to those GI Bill rights, which created a historical legacy of inequity for those families and stunted their ability to have generational wealth. And so this country has always been willing to make considerations for others. It's when we come to the table that there seems to be an issue. There's always seems to be a shortage. And that's what Dr. King was certainly addressing in his speech. And so I'm glad we're continuing to have that conversation today. We must have that conversation. And I'll say this, Dr. Cornel West, you all remember 15 years or so ago, maybe longer, when he wrote his book, Race Matters, he talked about the nihilistic threat and how our young people in particular, he was saying that is the greatest threat, because they're getting to the point where they feel, I don't want to call it hopelessness, but a sense that it doesn't matter. And that leads to this senseless taking of life. And so what creates this nihilism is this notion that it doesn't matter what I do, I'm never going to get a fair shake. And so economically, we've got to bring about some reform so those young people feel like they have a stake in their futures from an economic standpoint. And last thing I'll say is that I've been sharing a clip that I recently heard just Sunday on Echoes of Glory, where one of King's speeches, he talked about all here and now. He said, we want all of our rights. We want them right here in America. We're not going back to Africa, and we want them now. He said, if you continue to tell us to just chill out, he said, we keep on chilling out, eventually we'll be in a deep freeze. And so we want our rights now. So I'm glad we're having this conversation today.
Perfect. So let me put, I had gotten a quote before, I guess a couple days ago, and I posted it on Facebook. And it spoke specifically to, we're talking about unity and coming around, but it speaks specifically, and it says, we ain't won yet because we ain't won yet.
All right.
We ain't won, W-O-N.
That's right.
Because we ain't won yet.
That's right.
Anybody want to jump in on that? What does that mean to you this day and age? And more importantly, in the positions where you are, in terms of where you're at right now in life, what is it from your perspective that you believe we need to do to win as a people? So we ain't won yet because we ain't won yet. What does that mean to you?
Well, for me, I think that, it's interesting that the first principle of Kwanzaa is umoja, which also means unity. And I think that what is happening right now among us in terms of national Black leadership down to community leadership is that many people within the system of white supremacy, and I'm speaking specifically of Black folk, the system of white supremacy is rewarding them handsomely for selling out our community and our communities and creating division within it. We have, for example, down in Georgia, Herschel Walker, a not too bright former NFL football player whom Trump has endorsed to run against Senator Warnock. That creates disunity. So the system of white supremacy has always rewarded handsomely those who betray their own people, not just among Black folk, but among Native American people, among Japanese Americans, among several people. So I think that one of the things that we need to learn is how the system of white supremacy works to keep us divided. In South Africa during the apartheid era, white people set up and funded Gatsa Buthelezi of the Inkatha Freedom Party, which, warred against the ANC, the African National Congress. And that in turn created division and white folks sat back and looked at it. So I think we have to be aware of how these divisions created by the system of white supremacy divide us and keep us from being unified in our struggle against it.
If I can jump in there, and I agree 100%. One of the things I think we need to, so there needs to be an effort to educate our folks on systemic racism, white supremacy, because right now, if you don't, you have those people who really understand it, but then you have those people who don't. So when you see what we call so-called black on black crime, a lot of us think there's something wrong with us. If you see a historically black college that's underfunded, doesn't have the same resources or facilities as a white college, what's wrong with that black college? But you don't understand the historic underfunding that went into that. Our communities don't look like the suburban communities. So we think there's something wrong with us, but we have to understand how things got the way they are to make a change. And if you don't understand how things got the way they are, you're not going to be able to make a change. You're not going to have the will to make a change. You're just going to actually help uphold those systems that made things the way they are.
I think this would be a good point. If I may interject, I want to bring Ms. Harris in on this one, because with this, the whole political side of things, education is definitely, I'm the last one that's going to argue against that. So I agree with the education, but once you're educated, there's some action that needs to be taken, and part of that action has to be not solely, but a great majority has to be the political process. And so with that, I want to bring in Ms. Harris on this point, especially in this current climate of the redistricting and what that means, and possible disenfranchisement, et cetera, in terms of how we can be more active with purpose with regards to the voting process and accessing these ballots.
Right. There's two parts of it to me. There's the political process, as you mentioned. There's also even educating people on the different levels of government. As we all know, people like to rush out and vote in presidential years, but I would argue that's actually one of the least important elections. One of our most important elections was last year, where we had local and county elections. When people talk about education, vote for your school board members. We're talking about raising taxes or not raising your taxes, property taxes. We have snow right now, road cleanup, things of that nature. Those are your city councils, your mayors, if you live in the suburbs, your township supervisors, your commissioners. A lot of people don't understand what each level of government does and how they relate to them directly. So we need to educate people on the process of how to vote, but also what they're voting for. And, we also have to look at issues. A lot of times, and I'll use healthcare as an example, since I work in the healthcare field, but we always talk about access to healthcare. But it's not just the access to it, it's the quality of it. How many people know that even if you have healthcare insurance, a doctor can refuse to treat you? The only medical entity that cannot refuse to treat someone is an emergency room. And as we all know, sometimes by the time you get to an emergency room, it's too late. We also know that especially Black Americans, our life expectancy with or without health care is 10 years lower than white Americans. So, all of this comes into play, as well as to what level of government also can make certain changes to maybe perhaps correct that course. Doctors who receive government-funded health care payments, why are they refusing care to patients? So I think there's three levels of education we need to do: how to vote, what we're voting for, basically.
Certainly, I agree. And I also think that in that same vein, we had opportunities before in the community. We had like Marcus Garvey, we had the Children of Africa School. We had community-based programs where we were bringing our children, people were sending their children, we were educating them on their history.
Well, more important, I can speak to this being, a product of what they shout out always to the great Mike Cooper. Beyond just being the first black quarterback in Penn State history, he was the director of returning home and understanding that it was not robbery to give back to the community with regards to making sure that he led from a position of strength and power as a black man in America who knows he's a black man in America. And ironically, he worked at the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency where Mr. Brian Hudson is. So we had a plethora of great leadership, right there. But one of the things I wanted to say was it was one of those things where you all knew where y'all was sending us in terms of the education system and how that was in essence whitewashed. And so it was strategic. It was brilliant. I thought back on this maybe about 10 years ago of all the black males and females that were in the Marcus Garvey before and after school program. So what happened was they would pick us up in the morning between 6 a.m. and 6:45 a.m. We would get to the Camp Curtin YMCA. They would feed us breakfast, review our homework that we went over the previous night, and basically prepare us to go back to war, if you will. They would then pick us up at dismissal at 3:15 to 4:30. We would then return back to the Camp Curtin YMCA after school, and they would basically deprogram us because we would then, of course, go over our homework, etc. But they would instill in us African principles. When we sit back and we look at what was going on there, there's no wonder to Dr. Waters' point why they underfunded that program because of what you all were doing, and they're to blame for what you see here today. In terms of when I go out here in these meetings, etc. But all credit, God rest Joe Smooth so as well. But I wanted to throw that in because I understood 10 years ago. It took me a long time to really see exactly what was going on in terms of the importance of really getting the message instilled into the youth. And you all, and Mike Cooper, I gotta always go back to Mike Cooper, Sister Thayuta, Sister Karen Wright, and just quite frankly saying that you all had the real forethought of planting the seed for a tree to grow, understanding that you may not benefit from its shade. And I continue to thank you for that. We had two comments. Dr. Fitzgerald, I'd like to bring you in and then follow on that. Tameka Hatcher, please.
So I just wanted to say, that comment really hits home. We haven't won because we're not one. And I think part of that has to do with the fact that we continue to perpetuate division amongst ourselves. We have constantly been told what the definition of blackness is by white supremacists, by others who don't look like us, and they've defined what blackness is supposed to be. So many of us who are in these spaces where we can potentially create change are not trusted, and we're looked at as less than and not true Black people who are really down for the cause. And that is one of the reasons why some of us give up the fight, because we're not viewed in the same way, and people don't believe that the struggle is universal, regardless of what your background is. Whether you came from the projects or the suburbs, people fail to realize that you're still a Black person. All they see is what's on the outside.
And that's whether you're a doctor in the trauma division or you're a civil rights educator at Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission. And I can attest to that by just knowing you two sisters. Ms. Hatcher.
So there was a comment by Mr. Mitchell Bailey that I wanted to address. Do you all have that? It scrolled by really quick.
Sure.
He talked about, in a community where there is a split between the hopeful and the hopeless, with today's conversation being so robust, what is the true starting point for our people? And I think that that's a great question. And what I would dare to say is that the line between the hopeful and the hopeless is closing, like that gap is closing. There might have been a time where you could look at our community or society and say, okay, well, you've got haves or have-nots, or the educated, the uneducated, or people who see a way for the future and those who don't. But anymore, I don't see a real difference, because just like we see assassinations in the barroom, there are assassinations in the boardroom that happen every day. So what do you do when you go to college, when you get education, when you're faithful to the company for 25 years, and then you're summarily dismissed for no reason? That's what happened to me. which is why I have such a great appreciation for young people like Cornelius, young people like Reginald Haywood, who are really charting their own path. And I like that this generation is not doing what they've seen their parents and their grandparents do, and following the party line of, well, if you just get someplace, do good, you will be rewarded, because there's no guarantee of that. And when you're talking about coming for a check, they're out here getting it. They're getting to the money. They don't have a problem with changing jobs as it suits them economically, or as they go up the ladder. They don't have a problem with entering into entrepreneurship and wading into those waters at a young age so that they can see success. And the bottom line is that I believe there's nobody coming for us. Black people as a demographic have been the most loyal, and particularly Black women, to the Democratic Party. And to the Chair Lady Harris's point, she's absolutely right. We have to stop accepting the visual and start demanding action. Like, we need more than just showing up to the Black churches and talking about, you know, how some of your best friends are Black, and doing a little bit more. What is the party doing in terms of options for people? Because when I look at the field, it's heavy in the Republican side and very narrow in the Democratic field. And it's not giving us any options that I feel very comfortable with, quite honestly. What are we going to do? And the answer is, we have to save ourselves. And to Dr. Fitzgerald's point, sometimes people are distrustful of those of us who are in positions, because oftentimes those of us in positions have proven ourselves untrustworthy. We get into these positions and we're jealous, we backstab, and we backbite. And we're afraid that if we let another one come up, it's good enough for some of us to be just the only one. And we don't want to lift as we climb and see anybody else come up. And I think that that's some of our problem too, because the truth of the matter is, an educated Black person is far more dangerous than someone on the street in a bar room shooting people with guns. That's my truth.
That's a great point, and a great segue into Mr. Hudson, because, you know, part of the reason why there's a lot of access, part of the reasons why there's a lot going on in the economic development field, is because Mr. Hudson did not hoard the information. He goes out and statewide, nationwide, and he's really humbled and everything. But I'm going to highlight, give him his roses his flowers while he's there, you know, to understand it. He's basically, from my perspective, saved the housing market since 2007, 2008, with the plans that he had for Pennsylvania that was replicated throughout the nation. So when you're talking about access, when you're talking about not being satisfied with being at the top alone and making sure you let the ladder down, as the great Ron Brown has once said, for others to follow behind you, Mr. Hudson is the epitome of that. What does it mean to you, Mr. Hudson, to be in this position, or that quote, "We haven't won yet because we're not won yet"?
Well, you know, listening to the other comments, I'd say it's not getting, everyone's not on the same page. Some of the same stuff that Ms. Fitzgerald just talked about, you know, jealousy, not distrust, not supporting. You know, my father used to say two things, you know, there's nothing more dangerous than an educated Black man, and nothing scares folks more, or those in power more, when you start to divvy up the pie. So, education cannot be taken from you. Yes, can they play with the money and make sure you don't get your piece? But once that education comes, you have the grounds to fight. And if it's on their terms, then you do that. For me, it means I go back to the education. And I use this example because it showed how we, you know, the Black community was taken advantage of by not understanding the mortgage market. We didn't know what we was reading. We didn't know the documents. And it was Monroe County. They were advertising, get your dream home in the Poconos, and folks signed up. They colluded with the appraiser, and all of them, I would say not all of them, but 75% of those homes ended up in some sort of foreclosure. I spent months up there talking to them. Most of them, 75, 80% of the folks were Black, and some were doctors, believe it or not. And I said, this is an education issue. Luckily, we had a program. I sent them to HEMAP, would help pay their mortgage until they can get back on their feet. So we saved some of the homes, but for me, it was never enough. And I think those of us who are in a position have an obligation, if you will, to give back. And thank you for those comments, Karl. For me, it just seemed the natural thing to do when I look at the landscape and say, I don't see a lot of Black developers here. You know, if I'm going to give up my resources, how can I make this playing field a little more level? and get some more Black developers in here and get them trained so they can get some project. And that's what I wanted to do and give back. And now that I'm not running the place, I'm trying to depart that education to these developers in a different kind of way, because I'm not running the company, but doesn't mean they don't need to, they have the ability that they can understand the program and still get there. So when I hear that comment, I think we're not all on the same page. And those of us who are in a position to make change, to do everything in their power to do that. And that's how I feel strongly about. But at the same time, that's got to be a coordinated effort. It can't be this infighting. We got to get on the same page, and we got to work together. It may not, okay, I'm not crazy about this candidate, but I know he has a community at heart, and I know he'll be good for the community. Let's get behind somebody and let's get it done. But I think that's a key piece of everything. Being in the boardrooms all the way through. So from a community standpoint, what community is not getting their fair share of the money that's coming through? How can we change that? Well, how much money is coming? Do your research. Let's find out. I looked at these last big fires in Philadelphia and Chicago. Okay, Philadelphia, the children died, and in Chicago, the children were killed in those fires. Those were units that should never be in that type of condition. Who's running those? Where's the money at? Right. There's a good brother who's running the Philadelphia Housing Authority, and they tried to throw it on him. That's not his fault. I mean, he's trying to do the best with the resources that what he's got. So we're trying to address those issues on a national basis, because who lives in those developments? We do, basically. That's right. We're the majority. We make up those individuals. So that type of issues, we all need to get on the same page and fight for the same cause that's going to have significant impact. And the same message I say is this impact can't be one-off. It's got to be sustainable. And we got to hold folks who are in position accountable. So for me, that's what that means. And I think we just got to get there. We have to get there.
And I would be remiss if I didn't publicly thank you, Brian, for what you did in terms of helping developers who afford reentrants a piece of their development. You've allowed them to get a reduced discount on the percentage piece that they have to pay for those funds. So for the buildings. So I want to thank you, because that's something that, quite frankly, we know reentrants are always the last ones who are afforded housing. And so it's been truly an honor to be able to say that under your leadership, that was something that was accomplished. And I tell everybody everywhere I go across not only this Commonwealth, but all over the country. When I was down in DC talking to all of the other attorney generals across the country about reentry, that was one of the things I brought up. So that's kudos to you.
No, thank you. I mean, being in a position to make change is key. And I think those of us who have that type of power need to do that. Now, there was another issue that came up as I was exiting. It was barriers to home ownership. Obviously getting a home, building wealth, that's still the dream. It's still the way to build wealth. But we were impacted disproportionately, being denied applications. So as I was exiting, I had the reinvestment fund do a study and particularly in Philadelphia, but it's the same all over the country, quite truthfully. Why are minorities being denied applications for minor reasons where it stands out dramatically? So pretty soon there's going to be a release of that research, if you will, called Barriers to Home Ownership. That's going to be released by my former agency to move forward on that. So more to come. But I think when you're in that position to do that, you have to make that change. And I'll give you another example. When in the 90s, when the insurance companies would not write mortgage insurance in urban African-American or minority neighborhoods, they said it's too risky. I said, well, we're going to start our own insurance fund and we're going to write those in those areas. And guess what? We made a ton of money. They were no more riskier than other issues. Yes. And when I talk about splitting up the pie, they noticed that PHFA was making money. So then they tried to put us out of the business because they wanted to go in and jack up the premiums. Fast forward, the recession hit, they all got downgraded. We didn't. We stayed in the business. So we offer a mortgage insurance that's just as competitive, but more reasonable, and has the understanding and compassion that people go through ups and downs with employment. Yeah, you might be a little late. How can we help you? Let's start right away with the counseling effort. Let's get that done. But I think it's incumbent upon those who have the power to make change happen.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I'm preaching. I'm Charla. I'm going to get off that box, but I feel real passionate about that, and it's still there. And I'm going to help those who need to do that. So,
Mr. Robinson, can we hear from you, sir?
Thank you.
Okay.
I'm muted. Am I muted?
You're good.
There
now.
you go. We can hear you.
We can hear you now,
Good,
sir.
good. Thank you. You talk about that quote you had, Karl, about we can't be one until we're one.
Right.
That is, yeah.
Yeah.
As a proponent of Dr. King, I certainly would hearken us to pay attention to the attribute that he admonishes us all to exhibit, and that's the attribute of humility. When you talk about why can't we all get together, one of the reasons, certainly we know, someone said at the outset, I think Dr. Winbush, about how some people will always try to go through the back door and pull you away with some kind of side deal, that kind of thing, and someone always will go for the okie doke, and that is true. But also, we as individuals, we have to be like Dr. King talked about in his drum major speech, where we have to resist that desire, that need to be in front of the parade. And we have to, once we get beyond that, if you know the history of the March on Washington, all those presenters were jockeying to see what the speaking order would be, because they were afraid that if on that hot August day, all the media would leave after so long. And Dr. King said, listen, it doesn't matter to me. I'm happy to go last. And of course he did, and the rest is history. But there, this need to be up front. And so I harken back to that tried adage that says it's amazing how much you can get done when no one cares who gets the credit. And that's the problem. That's one of the problems. I've taken the side deal. We as individuals have to stop caring about who gets the credit.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. So that's a great point. Myneca, let's bring you back in on this topic. Yes, please.
Yeah, this is, thank you. I've heard everything that everyone has said, and I think it's important to realize a couple of things here. Number one, jealousy is a human quality, so that's something that's for the most part innate in all of us. Second part is that this divide and conquer mentality has always been around, specifically with African Americans. I mean, even back in slavery, we were always pitted against each other. We worked in the house, or we had an additional responsibility. So, it's been there for a while. And I have just never seen a people, and I'm just looking in history, Dr. Ray Bush, to see a people that have been diminished. I know in every single society in the world, there is one group that is of the lower caste. I've never seen a country like America where they created a lower caste of people by bringing people over from Africa. So much of this is just built systemically into where we are. We are designed by a system that tells us that we're not supposed to hope, we're not supposed to dream. And so from there, even though we're in this system that was created, and it's getting better over time, we're breaking down those systems, we're normalizing different practices over time. But the system really has placed us in this fishbowl, so to speak, that we're constantly fighting. And if we're in this fishbowl and we're all in this together, we're naturally going to turn on each other. So those are some of the things that happen when people are in tight or confined situations, and there's a lack of hope and there's a lack of dreaming. A lot of times, there's often a comparison of African Americans to immigrant groups, even the Caribbean groups and other groups. But we're not that group. we're this group that, especially American descendants of slaves, who have gone through the system. So it's not a fair comparison to connect it to someone from the Caribbean or immigrants that have come to this country from Africa. They've really done, they meaning the system has really done a job on us. But the question is, how do we move away from that so that we can become full citizens of this country and be able to come together for a greater purpose? And this is what we're always seeking to do, particularly in our communities. When we see that there's deaths, when there's killings, that there's incarceration, even in the workplace, in the professional workplace, where many of us have been in those environments, where the one that, that's really knocking us down is one that look like us, but they're holding the water, for the system of someone else. And then, thinking that they will get rewarded over time. But really what happens is that you have less people advocating for you when one is taken away from the system.
That's right.
So the question is, how do we bring it together? But there's one quick point I want to make too with regards to what Brian had said, and also to go back to Chairwoman Harris with regard to voting, particularly in these local elections. I remember when I was mayor, just as I was going out, there was a ordinance that was on the table that most people did not know about. We, as a group, many of us on the council, and of course me being mayor, really advocated for the fire department to have the opportunity to go into the rental properties and to inspect, because many of those situations that were occurring, particularly in my town where it's almost 60% rental properties, many of them had some of the same situations that led to the fires that happened in Philadelphia and New York. And what occurred is that the council meeting, was flooded with landlords, 90% of them not even living in the same town. I just wanted to say, to really say that they were in opposition to having their properties inspected every 2 years for the cost of $25. So consequently that got tabled, and I was outgoing as mayor, and I never saw it come back on the table. So really, when you talk about the importance of voting, it really is important that you're really voting and advocating for your community, and people are voting for the things. Oftentimes in local elections, they vote based on party, particularly in my small town. Right. And these people are actually coming to the table with no agenda. And if you really start watching these town hall meetings, there's no agenda that is supporting the people that they're supposed to be representing. So it's just important that we.
You're talking about Hanover, be clear.
This is Hanover, Pennsylvania, and every other community out there as well. It's important we get to be a part of the process. But in terms of how we reach together as one, I'm still waiting for the solution, but I'm really ready to work on it. So,
yeah. I got it. Go ahead. Yeah, I want to say something. I hope this doesn't come off as being pessimistic or anything like this, but I'm afraid it will be. I think when Black folk get together, as we are now, we tend to always we're critical of ourselves. I've been critical of ourselves in this meeting a little bit. There's an analogy that I use in one of my books about, we use the expression crabs in a barrel a lot, and we focus on the crabs. They're jealous of each other. They pull each other down. All of that. I think that we need to focus more on the barrel itself. How did the crabs get in the barrel?
Right.
Why are they trying to get out, and who put them there, and what will happen when they do get out? And I think, and this is my pessimistic stuff, there's a book by Frank Wilderson called Afro-Pessimism. he teaches out in California, head of Black Studies at one of the universities, and he says no matter what Black people do, like if we found a cure for COVID, cancer, and AIDS, and had it in a pill and sold it for $2, then no matter what Black folk do, people classified as white are going to see us as subhuman, no matter what we do. And I think right now, like we're talking about voting, for example, there are places right now, the institute that I direct, there are 27 states right now that are going to, the only word I can use is fix the 2022 midterms and fix the 2024 presidential national elections. I think that we underestimated how angry, furious, if you please, white folks were when Barack Obama was elected.
Thank you.
In the summer of 20, when Breonna Taylor and George Floyd were killed, and those white children were coming home and asking their parents, "What is systematic racism?"
Right.
You didn't tell me about that. So then you saw this so-called bogus idea of critical race theory, which is now we're using the term, and it ain't even the term what critical race theory is. So I'm more pessimistic. I think these next 3 or 4 years, we're going to see a really bad time among Black folk, and we're going to have to act differently. We can vote. I always vote. But I think we're going to have to see what happens when huge sections of this country cannot vote, like they've done in Harris County, Texas, where there is one now drop box, and that's the county that takes in Houston, the 4th largest city in this country, when they say there's only going to be one ballot box there or drop-in box. So I'm a little more pessimistic. I don't want to be, but you got to also know what the signs of the times are. And for Black folk right now, it's looking really, really bad because white people are furious right now, and they're angry, and they're taking it out on us.
Yeah, Dr. Waters, I know he's ready. He's taking notes. I saw.
No, I was sitting here listening to people. I just had a couple of comments, just what people were saying, and listen to Doc speak, and talk about voting. A lot of people don't think that voting is important. If it wasn't important, they wouldn't be doing some of the stuff that they're doing right now. And they are very mad. But some of the things we have to realize is that there are 3 branches of government at the federal level. There's the judicial, legislative, and executive branch. And you have to have some kind of control and influence in all 3. The last election we had in the midterm in the spring, not the midterm, the election we had in the spring, I think it was less than 30%. It was primaries, less than 30% turnout. That's terrible. So I hear people saying that people are getting apathetic. You're apathetic because you don't understand the political process. You don't understand the government, and you think that you're going to vote for a president and the president's going to save you. Then you're upset because he's not saving you. He's not saving you because you didn't give him the tools and the resources he needs to make a difference. So perfect example, we have 2 senators, Democratic senators, who are holding up a child tax credit, universal pre-K, which could be a game changer for our Black kids, and increased funding for urban schools. Right now, we have the opportunity next year to actually put 2 Democratic senators from the state of Pennsylvania in the Senate who can change that. But people have to get out and vote. You can't wait until there's a Kamala Harris on as a vice presidential candidate or Barack Obama. You have to vote in every election. You have to educate yourself to make a difference. Because if you don't, you're just going to be upset because you're not getting the results that you don't want. And also, I want to say, we have to be careful and understand, what true equity is. I think we have been fooled we talk about integration, but what we saw really is assimilation. One of the things, we celebrate Jackie Robinson. If we had true integration, we wouldn't be celebrating Jackie Robinson. We would have Negro League baseball teams who are part of the major leagues, and we'd have ownership. We wouldn't be celebrating being the entertainment. We can't be satisfied with being the entertainment, and I think that's what happened. We have to make sure that we're truly integrating and not assimilating. If we were truly integrated, I could see Howard University as a top 20 basketball team. But instead, we ran off and we left our institutions and our businesses.
And if I can hop in real quick here, is I think to Dr. Waters' point about just the 2 Democratic senators, I think there's 2 Democratic senators and there's 50 Republican senators as well that are holding up some of the major pieces of legislation. So right now we're looking at it, I think, the way America has become so polarized is just saying like, hey, we have these 2 that's holding us up. There's 50 people who are aligned on their agenda, no matter what, even if it benefits their state, they have an alignment to kind of say, we are going to hold it up. And I think those states are even states that we can begin to have impact on, because they also, just like Black people will benefit from universal pre-K, poor white people will benefit from universal pre-K. But there's a narrative around what they're pitching as being important, what they're pitching at kind of saying like, hey, this is just for these lower class Black people, not being able to look themselves inside the face that they're also lower class too, and that their ignorance and their unwillingness to bend to see people who look differently than them prosper is also holding them back. And then just a quick another point on the quote is that I may be a little bit of an antagonist or a pessimist too, is I don't think we're going to get to a point where in order for us to win that we are all going to be aligned. I just think that there's going to be people who look like us, who act just like us, who are not going to have our best interests in mind. And I think the quicker that we're able to identify people who are not about moving us forward and and the same thing happens with white people, same thing happened with Democrats and Republicans. There's people who hold power within these offices who say they're going to be and have our best interests in mind, or whether that's on your local school board or at a company, but they're not really serving us. So the quicker that we identify who is holding us back, no matter what they look like, and there's a collective that's able to move an agenda forward, that's when we begin to see progress. Because even during MLK's time, they weren't all aligned, but there was a collective that decided that even through the division, that we're going to pull enough people forward and be persistent to move the agenda.
That's right. To Craig Lewis' point, everybody can't come along. And to your earlier point, as Lyndon B. Johnson said, in terms of classism, as we go back to, convince the lowest white man he's better than the best colored man. And you can pick his pockets too. And so we have this thing where racism, while still important, and I say this to today, racism is still important in our society, but classism is just as important, because we're at a point now where if you're white and poor and living in Hall Manor, or Latino and poor and living in Hall Manor, where I'm from, you're expendable too. And they always talk about how you watch carefully with the comedians who are some of the brightest people in the world, the comics, because the joke and the truth is in their craft. And when you look at Dave Chappelle, how he talked about the fact that he ain't worried about some of these people being talking about him, or 45 talking about him. He's not talking about me. He's talking about all you poor white people, because I'm rich, and that is some truth. It was laughter, it was funny, but it was true. And we're at a point now, I fully believe, where as we begin to wind down, there was another quote today that was posted on Facebook by Representative Jordan Harris out of Philadelphia. And he specifically said, and he was quoted, not him being quoted, but he had posted this quote, says, "May the MLK quote you post today align with the words and actions you choose over the next 364 days. May the MLK quote you post today align with the words and actions you choose over the next 364 days. And that in itself, I think, brings us full circle to why we're here. We're coming to get our check. Equity, inclusivity, meaningful equity, meaningful inclusivity, making sure, to Dr. Winbush's point, that it's not good enough to victimize the victims and talk about the crabs in the barrel. Let's ask the fundamental question. More important, let's be willing to challenge the system when we say, we understand there's crabs in the barrel, but who put them there? And more importantly, why? And what are we willing to do going forward to make sure that that system is not still in place this time next year? And so that is not meant to be rhetorical. That is meant to be action. That is an action item as we move forward. As we begin to wind down, I want to give everybody a chance to, give us some closing comments. Those of you that are on here now, we're going to come back because we want to have this exact panel back on as we go into our 2022, not only Black History Month, but we do a piece that's called Black Excellence, 24/7, 365 days a year. So we want all of you to come back and have a segment on that, as well as we're going to be going to some different areas. We've moved from just the Monday, Thursday show to going to just the Monday show as we go forward. But with that being said, I want to, you're good. No.
So I'm going to put forth the challenge for us by the next time we meet. Mm-hmm. And that is that we consciously come up with a strategy to increase voter turnout for Dauphin County. Mm-hmm. We have, the city of Harrisburg. We had over 33,000 registered voters. And we know that with this election, we probably had about 7,000 or 8,000 that came out and voted. So we have to figure out, and certainly with the help of DCDC, what kind of strategies we can put in place to ensure that folks are registering to vote, and not only registering to vote, but coming out to vote. Part of it, I think, is there's the political education piece that we talked about. We have to figure out how we can strategically bring people to the table to run for some of these offices that we know have been vacant for the last few elections. Not only run, but be successful. And then how do we ensure that our community is educated on who's running for what and how it's going to serve them best, and ensure that we're getting the things for our community that we need.
That's one of the things I agree with you. One of the things I wanted to follow up on with Mr. Johnson was when you talked about, when we talk about having 2 Democratic senators. Yeah, that's cool. Let's make sure we're putting 2 Democratic senators in with an agenda that reflects our community. And if not so, they are voted out as well. In terms of, the other side, let's also tell that story. If you're talking about the Democrat side, let's talk about the Republican side. If in fact you're over there as a Black Republican, let's talk about why you're over there in terms of commitment to community, in terms of the underserved, underrepresented, and oftentimes undereducated. And those are the conversations that I believe we have to continue to have, and not only have, but instead of having a conversation about what does these candidates want, when they come in, let's say, this is what we want you to support. And if you do, cool. If you don't, you're out. Yes. And that's the thing, not what you're going to do once you're in. Here's what the community is saying. We're yearning for what we like you to support. And if you can sign on to this, we'll support you. If not, best wishes to you. And at that point, that's where we start to, really move forward. So as we begin to close down, I want to just be able to do several things. Of course, give you all, we're going to take a quick, 10 to 15. Oh, we're going to take a quick 10 to 15 seconds for you to close out. But we learned today, and in the sake of really humanity, We want to offer our condolences. We understand Commissioner George Hartwick's father passed away today. So we want to send our condolences to the Hartwick family. As we move forward in this 2022, we'll continue to keep the Hartwicks lifted up in prayers as they go through this bereavement with the passing of his father. Of course, on a more positive note than death, I'd like to wish the triplets, as I'm one of, a pre-happy birthday. Myself, Myneca, and Brian, we all share a birthday on this coming Saturday, the 22nd. Of course, shout out to Chad Scott and then Mink in the comedy show that's coming up this Saturday. And with that being said, I want to give you all an opportunity, 10 to 15 seconds to close out, because you will be back. So we can start with, I'm sorry. Yes, we're definitely Black History Month. But even before that, we're gonna have you all back Black History Month. But we're gonna have you rotating as well. We're looking forward to announcing something special with Dr. Karima Fitzgerald also. So with that being said, we'll move right into the closings. Let's start with Mr. Waters, Dr. Waters.
Yeah, just briefly, some like 10 to 15 seconds is just, we have to educate ourselves. We have to educate ourselves on all matters in our community. And we have to be a voice, and can't be scared to speak up.
All right. Amen.
Okay.
Brian, Mr. Hudson.
Okay. No, I'm going to be quick. I got 3 words: education, accountability, and sustainability. Those are the 3 biggies that I lay on the table to help us get together and move forward.
Amen.
That's right. Mr. Johnson.
Real quick, let's work, carrying forward the conversation into action.
Ms. Harris.
We can't forget that our vote is our voice. Change begins at the ballot box, but it doesn't end. We have to keep our elected officials accountable and make sure they know if they don't do what they need to do, we're going to vote them out.
So, Joe.
Yeah. In the words of Jesse Jackson, let's keep hope alive.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Hudson. Oh, I'm sorry.
I'll go again. You want me to, but no.
You want to?
No, go ahead.
Ms. Hatcher. Oh.
Sorry, just had to unmute. Let's bring civility back to civil rights.
Okay. Mr. Robinson.
As I said earlier, all here and now.
All here and now. Wow. Okay. Dr. Fitzgerald, please.
We are more than what we've been given, and we have the power to get exactly what we deserve.
All right.
Dr. Winbush, sir.
Spend 30 minutes a day reading some aspect of Black history.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mm. You have any suggestions? You know any authors? Do you know any authors?
A few. Read Frank Wilderson's book, Afro-Pessimism.
I mean, do you have anything new coming out, or what's your latest?
The one about Dr. Francis Cress Wellesley.
Yes.
Oh, all right.
The Osiris Papers. You can get it online.
All right.
Okay. All right.
Thank you. Thank you. And I think we're going to end with a clip, but first and foremost, a sincere, heartfelt thank you of gratitude and appreciation for my great co-host, who's really the host, my mentor, a mentor of mine, not only inside of classrooms and inside of learning institutions, but in the community as well, through your leadership, your steadfastness, being on the battlefield, thinking they're not robbery, as again I said, to pay it forward with guys and ladies like me, in terms of being from the young stages of entering into this field to currently picking up the phone even today saying, you need to give me a little redirection from time to time. So I love you and appreciate you, and always,
I'm proud of you.
We're thinking that means a lot coming from you.
Always looking at you and saying, man, he's one of our kids.
That's right. I still, even with the girth and the gray, I'm still pie from Hall Manor.
Thank you all for the opportunity. It was great seeing everybody.
Thank you.
Talk to everybody, and stay in prayer that we're going to be here again next year to do the same thing all over again.
Yes.
All right. And on that note, we thank you. Continue to like and share Seat at the Table and all of Music Man Multimedia Studios podcast. We'll be over on YouTube as well. So as we go out, as we exit gracefully, please pay attention to the clip. We'll see you next time on the Seat at the Table.
There must be a revolution of values in our country. As Jimmy Baldwin said on one occasion, what advantage is there in being integrated into a burning house? And I feel that there is a need for a revolution of values in America, because some of the values that presently exist are certainly out of line with the values and the idealistic structure that brought our nation into being. Unfortunately, we haven't been true to these ideas at the moment. But I must confess that that dream that I had that day has at many points turned into a nightmare. Now, I'm not one to lose hope. I keep on hoping. I still have faith in the future. But I've had to analyze many things over the last few years, and I would say over the last few months. I've gone through a lot of soul-searching and agonizing moments, and I've come to see that we have many more difficult days ahead, and some of the old optimism was a little superficial, and now it must be tempered with a solid realism. And I think the realistic fact is that we still have a long, long way to go